Hello, my name is Danny Krastik here for 90.3 WMSC Upper Montclair, and we are here once again with a very, very special guest. If you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us what movie we're talking about this week.
So first off, thanks for having me on. My name is Brandon Tamburri, and I'm a filmmaker. I recently made a feature film called Plan B that was just released.
hmm And can you tell us what the movie's about for those who haven't heard of it yet?
Absolutely. Plan B is about this girl in her early 30s, doesn't really have her life together, and she drunkenly sleeps with this awkward guy who lives in her apartment building. And from this one night stand, she winds up pregnant. And when she goes to tell this guy that she's pregnant, she just realizes how unfit he is to be a father. So she decides to not only keep the pregnancy a secret from him, but she then decides to quickly try to find a more successful guy that she can then sleep with and then tell this new guy that he's the father.
hmm
And that really brings us on a very funny and chaotic trail.
hmm Definitely very funny, definitely very chaotic. Let's talk about you for a minute here. How'd you get into the film business?
So I got into the film business, something I always wanted to do ever since I was a kid. But after I graduated college, I'd say even in college, I was bouncing around, taking different PA jobs, working as a production assistant on local productions, local movies, local TV shows. I do live in New Jersey as well. So, uh, all in the area of hopefully a lot of our listeners. And then once I graduated, I got a job working as the assistant to a film producer at a bigger production company and pretty much just worked my way up. I eventually got more involved with the projects that that company was working on. I was an associate producer on a horror film called Hereditary that came out a few years ago, with released by A24. And then a couple of years ago, I decided to launch my own production company and set off on trying to make this film Plan B, which again just came out this weekend.
hmm I'm happy you brought up Hereditary because that's a classic favorite over here at the station. I did want to ask like what how involved were you with the production of Hereditary and real quick before we get into your new movie, do you have any fun behind the scenes with Hereditary that you can mention for us?
I'm happy to talk about Hereditary. It was a really cool project to be involved with. I kind of lucked into it in a way because I mentioned I was working at a production company, so I was involved in all of the projects that that company was working on. Some of them were good, some of them not so good, but Hereditary, thankfully, was one of the very good ones. Probably, not probably, it was the best one for sure. And on that, I was an associate producer, which is essentially like a I'd say like the lowest tier of producers. So anything that was like something important that had to happen that the main producer didn't have time for, I would do. I was definitely involved creatively for sure, whether it be reading the script and providing some notes, or when we were actually in the edit, I was very involved in that process as well as watching cuts of the film and providing notes and just trying to help provide any creative input that I could. But then there also were a bunch of other just random administrative stuff I would have to do, like help scheduling calls and opening insurance policies and bank accounts and dealing with like shipping all of the props after filming and storing them in storage units, just random stuff like that. So definitely some cool creative stuff, and then also just some random other tasks that nobody else really wanted to do, and I had to do them.
Yeah. So obviously you've worked in comedy and you've worked in horror. So do you think that those two genres, I mean, they're very different, obviously, but do you think that there's any overlap? And how do you think that working on something like Hereditary, which is very different tonally from Plan B, do you think that experience helped you at all when it came to directing this?
So in terms of the tone, I'm not 100% sure. Like I love horror as a consumer,
hmm
not necessarily something I'm interested in continuing to make. I would rather make people laugh than scare them. But at the same time, I definitely learned a lot from Hereditary just in terms of getting to work on an independent film because Hereditary was completely independent, done without a studio, and got into Sundance, and then A24 ended up releasing it and picking it up. So I learned so much just about the actual production side of things.
hmm
And I'd say even not that this is directly correlated, but just from a script standpoint, like I remember the director of Hereditary, Ari Aster, he would always describe it as a drama that like turned into a horror. And I always think as well with not only a comedy, but like any project, like they should always work as a drama. Like the comedy should come second. Like you obviously want the comedy to lead the story, but at the end of the day, if you take out all of the funny moments, it should still be a good movie. And I think that's the same way that Ari, hope I don't want to quote him or anything, but viewed it as well, where like a horror film should still work as a movie if you take out all the horror.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about Plan B now, the reason that you're here. Obviously it's it's a wild concept and it's a crazy movie. So how'd you come up with the idea for it?
Back when I was in college, I had a friend toss around the idea of like a pregnancy movie that was kind of similar, but there just was something that wasn't really clicking with it. And then that idea really just like marinated in my head for a couple of years. And then as I got older and just saw some people close to me in real life were getting pregnant and dealing with pregnancies, uh, then I'd say that the real life experiences kind of combined with that previous idea that had been sitting in my head really just came together to form this, like thinking about how serious a pregnancy could be and then just trying to put a funny twist on it. Because one thing I always like to do with my projects are take some kind of serious subject matter and put a comedic twist on them. And I think this is a comedic twist on a unplanned pregnancy.
100%, yeah. So like, talking about, this pregnancy movie stuff like that, were you influenced by any other movies that already previously existed when you were coming up with this movie? Or was it all, like what were the influences directly on the film?
So there's definitely, I'd say I watched pretty much every single pregnancy movie you could think of. Knocked Up is a big one. There's definitely some similarities, I would say, with Knocked Up, just in terms of being a comedy movie about unplanned pregnancy. So that's one that a lot of people would think of. Overall, though, and tying into Knocked Up a little bit more, I'm a huge fan of Judd Apatow. He was always my favorite comedic filmmaker, probably since I was in high school. And he's someone who would really just make not only comedy movies, but comedy movies that just had a lot of heart and a lot of really good emotional scenes. So that's really what I was trying to do with this. And then there's also some other movies like at the end of the day, it is a romantic comedy, something like I would say How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. That's in my mind, a good romantic comedy movie that does a lot of what you will see in a lot of rom-coms is some kind of lie or just like an ulterior motive. And that's something that I really tried to utilize in this movie Plan B as well.
Hmm. Yeah, so another thing I want to talk about with this movie, sticking with the script a bit, there's a bunch of characters in this movie. There's a ton of side characters in addition to our obviously our leads, and all of them have their own little very unique, very quirky personalities, and they all have their little gags throughout the movie and everything like that. How did you manage both coming up with that many gags and that many characters, and also being able to juggle it so that it doesn't become overcrowded in the film? Because it doesn't become over. It's a very well balanced movie, which is, I'm very curious how you were you know, able to keep so much going and not really feel like you're cramming anything in.
Well, first off, I appreciate that. And then second, I'll say that a lot of these side characters, even though they are side characters and supporting characters, it's always important for them to one, serve the story. There aren't necessarily characters that are just popping up for no reason. That's something that I'd say is a almost a blessing as a filmmaker behind a lower budget independent film because you just can't really afford to have that many characters. Sometimes you'll watch a movie and there's like 50 different characters, and Plan B does have quite a bit of characters, but in early drafts of the script there were way more, and I was always trying to just combine characters, cut characters, just to try to make the characters that are in the movie as juicy of roles as possible. And all of the characters too. Again, they should serve some kind of purpose. Like they shouldn't be there for no reason. Like if a character comes in, like they should at least one have their own character arc or two at least directly tie into the character arc of the protagonist of the story.
Hmm. And to stick with the characters for a bit, there are some, some very pretty high profile actors that are in this movie, specifically, Jamie Lee, you've got Jon Heder. So how did you end up getting, all of these people to help out with the movie?
So at first, I raised all of the money to be able to make the movie. That's definitely, I'd say, for any listeners out there, the toughest thing to be able to do, be able to get your financing. Once you have the financing, you'd be surprised at how, I don't want to say easy it is to cast a film, but you'll be able to get some kind of actors to come on board because at the end of the day, actors are in this business for a reason. They really like to work. So if you have a go movie and say, "Hey, we're filming this time," then you're going to be able to get someone to do it at the very least. We were able to get some really great actors, like you mentioned. So Jamie Lee is a very funny comedian, someone I'd been a fan of for years before filming this, and we had just got the script in front of her, and she read it, really liked it, and decided to come on board. And then at that point, I'd say something very similar happened to Jon Heder. I had a producer that I brought onto the movie to help out with talking to some of these agents and negotiating contracts. And he asked me who my top choices were, and Jon Heder was someone I really like. So we ended up making the offer to Jon Heder. He read the script. Him and I had a Zoom conversation about it, and he said he wanted to do the movie, which was awesome for me. And then once we had Jon Heder and Jamie Lee, we set our filming dates, and a lot of the other actors, to be honest, just fell into place. I had like Kate Flannery was someone that I really liked. We're both from the Philadelphia area, so she was someone I had wanted to do this movie, and we reached out to her. And then similar things with Tom Berenger and Shannon Elizabeth. Pretty much every person at that point that I wanted to do the movie, we made them an offer and they did it, which was great. I think it really was just a testament to one, the other cast they were going to be working with, and also the quality of the script. The script is what attracted, I'd say, Jamie and John, and then everyone else like Tom Berenger, Shannon Elizabeth, Kate Flannery, Michael Lombardi. The other actors were just intrigued by one, the script, but two, the idea of working with really funny people like Jamie Lee and Jon Heder.
Yeah, 100%. And again, like you mentioned, because you have, so many extremely talented comedians and comedic actors, I'm sure there was a lot of improv in addition to what was already written in the script. How much would you say of the final product, I guess, if you know, like how much improv was actually left into the movie, how much ended up getting cut out of the movie?
Well, it's tough to put a percentage on it because, like, the actual story is exactly the same.
Mhm.
Like, there's no new scenes or anything like that that were just spur of the moment improv. There definitely are quite a bit of improv dialogue in every scene, I'd say sprinkled throughout. So maybe if you really had to put a number on it, maybe like 5% of the dialogue is improv, maybe a little bit more than that. But the way I like to shoot is you have a script, obviously, film whatever's in the script because you obviously need to have that cohesive story.
Mhm.
And then if you have enough time, uh, do another take and just tell the actor, like, look, you just did exactly what was written on the page. And now here's a time where you can just go one more shot and just get us from point A to point B without actually saying the lines word for word. Put your own twist on it. And
Mhm.
also just even when we're doing the lines in the script, I would always tell the actor, like, look, if you ever like even not that we had a ton of flub lines, but if you're ever flubbing a line or you just forget like your line or something like that, which it does happen occasionally, just keep going. Like you know your character at this point, just keep going to try to get to that finish line and don't kill the take. Just keep going because we in an indie film when you're really rushed, you really can't afford just to lose a whole take.
Yeah, absolutely. So the movie is out now. It's been doing its festival run. It's released now. I'm assuming you're very happy with the final product, obviously.
Yeah, I'm definitely very happy with the movie. I'm proud of it. It took me years, to be honest, to get to this point. So to be able to have it released and people have the ability now to just search on their TV and the different streaming platforms, Apple, and a few others, it's really cool.
Yeah, 100%. So now the movie's out. I mean, what's next? What's next for you?
So I have a couple other scripts that I'll say am working on because you're always working on a script even up until you start shooting it, and even sometimes while you're shooting it, you're working on it. But I have two scripts that hopefully will get going at some point, and just a bunch of other stuff that I say I have in the works. Another thing I'm excited about as well that's been taking up a lot of my time over the last month or so is we released a podcast called the Joke Zero podcast, and that's my company name, Joke Zero. And it's an independent filmmaking podcast. So it gives a lot of insight and behind the scenes stories on not only on Plan B, but just independent filmmaking as a whole. So we released, well, I'll say we are released, we're in the process of releasing, we've recorded them, a 20 episode first season that really does focus on Plan B. So we have pretty much all of the cast and the crew on the podcast, one member of the cast or crew per episode. And they talk about getting their start in the industry. They talk about past projects they've worked on, and then they ultimately start talking about what it was like to work on Plan B. And it was really fun to record that podcast and reminisce about all of the good times we had on set. And it's also just very interesting for me as a fan of film and a fan of comedy to get to hear Jon Heder talk about working on Napoleon Dynamite and Kate Flannery working on The Office and Tom Berenger working on Platoon and Major League. So definitely some really cool conversations that I would recommend listening to for all the filmmakers and people who are interested in Hollywood out there.
Yeah, that sounds awesome, especially for, as you know, we're a college radio station. So, we have a lot of, people trying to get into the industry and people trying to get advice from the industry and figuring out how to do movie, basically, So, in addition to listening to your podcast, which it sounds like is going to have some really, really cool insight, what's some advice that you have for people that are trying to get into film professionally?
Well, I'll give two different pieces of advice. One is more creative and one is really on the business side of the industry. So creatively, I would say just continue to make content, even if it's not good. Eventually, if you continue to crank out content, it's going to get better. Whether it's a TikTok video, which that wasn't around when I was in college, but if you want to be a writer, write a script, like write a feature film. Start off writing a short film and then eventually write a feature, because you'll be surprised how many people tell me that they're writers and I'll say, "Oh, can you want to send me one of your scripts?" And they're like, "Well, I haven't written it yet." So always have something ready to go. Another piece of advice just regarding that is to make something that like you have your resources for. Like a lot of college students, or even right when you graduate college, it's not very realistic to just set off and make a feature film over a weekend with your friends. Like that's something that maybe you can do. It's probably not going to turn out to be that good unless you're just like a genius, like a Steven Spielberg kind of kid.
Mhm.
Um, but like for me, when I was in college, I wanted to make something, and even a short film is even expensive to make at this point. So I was thinking, like, what can I shoot for very little money? And I made a web series that was revolving around my younger brother's little league baseball team that my older brother was the coach for. And I really did the whole thing. I had my own camera and just showed up to all of the games and I filmed them and put a comedic twist on it. And I filmed it in like a mockumentary kind of way, like The Office or Parks and Rec, and filmed all of the games and then did cutaways to the players making jokes and things like that. And I was writing a lot of jokes for them. But the fact that it was filmed by just me and a handheld camera, since it was that style of show, people would watch it and it looked great to them. It was, but if I was doing like a full feature film and it looked like that, people probably would not think it looked very good. So I just knew what my limitations were and ran with it. So just try to do something that you think you're capable of giving like a good final product for, and then continue to do that, and they'll get better and better. So that's the creative advice. And then I can also give more.
Please do. Please do.
Yeah, this is more of my advice on the business side. So at least the way I view it and the way that I'd say it really is, and a lot of film students don't realize this, is that the film industry and the entertainment industry is a business. So it's really important to be knowledgeable about just general business and how things work in the business world. So for me, I was a film major and then I ended up switching my major to business and I picked up a film minor. So the reason why I did that is because at my school, which was St. Joe's in Philadelphia at the time, I'm not sure if it's still like this, but it was a film and theater dual major. So I was taking acting classes and theater classes, which I really didn't want to do. So I decided to switch to an entrepreneurship major and I had a film minor. And through the film minor, I was able to take pretty much every single film class that I wanted to. And it turned out to be a really great decision because I learned so much about business and then was able to apply all of those things I learned about business to the business of film.
Hmm.
Even like this film Plan B. besides directing it and co-writing it, I also produced it. And being a producer is like being, I'd say, the CEO of a business. You're in charge of everything, you're putting everything together. And there are some creative elements where you're helping the filmmaker with the script and doing casting insights and things like that. But a lot of it is just being the being like the head person and managing the business that is the movie. So I'd say definitely do your best to learn about business in general and also the business of film. You can also listen to podcasts and watch YouTube videos. There's really so many resources out there that even myself, I graduated college in 2016, didn't necessarily have that are available now. Um, yeah, one last piece too. I kind of went on a rant with all of this advice, but there's a lot of different ways to be able to join the film industry and still be very involved in a movie. A lot of kids in college will just be they'll have the mindset like they want to be a writer, they want to be a director, maybe they want to be a cinematographer or something like that. But there's so many other positions on the crew that most people don't think about that are very involved in a movie, like a say post-production supervisor. Like that's someone who is very hands-on in the process of post-production. They're very active in talking with the director and talking to the producers, and it's very much like a creative role in a way. Even like a post-production accountant or a production accountant. These are positions that I'd say most film students aren't in school thinking I want to go be a production accountant, but at the same time, it's a very good way to get your in the industry as an entry level job and then work your way up. And you could eventually go from production accountant to a line producer, which a lot of people actually do. So definitely just try to get in any way that you can and work your way up, keep making content and look at things from a business lens.
Hmm. Awesome. Now, real quick, your Little League web series, where is that available?
Yeah, if anyone wants to watch that, I believe it is still on YouTube,
Oh wow.
and it is called
Small ball.
Small Ball, a season with the Marauders. And I, yeah, I've never taken it off, so I think it is still on YouTube, and it is definitely a fun
Great.
project that I would say I wouldn't view that now as a like a reflection of my work. But looking at it, thinking that a college kid made it, I think it's very good. And it is at the end of the day, it is funny. Like someone will watch that and say, "Yeah, that was entertaining for sure." I
Good.
think it was like 11 episodes. They're maybe like 7 to 10 minutes each.
Well, that's awesome. Now, we have one more question. We ask this of all of our guests that we have on the show, and you can answer it in whatever way you want with as much detail as you want. What is your favorite movie of all time?
I would say my favorite movie of all time, which is, I'll say this is surprising because I do obviously love comedies, but I really love Titanic. I just think that's such a good, such a good movie. It gets
Everyone
me
loves Titanic.
gets me every time. Just such a good story, and I typically don't like movies that are like over 2.5 hours long, but that's one that I just want it to even be longer when I'm watching that. But I will also say, because I'm a comedy person, I love Superbad. That's probably my favorite comedy movie.
Mhm. Oh, great. Well, Brandon, thank you very, very much for coming on the show today. Plan B is out now, so if anyone is interested in watching it, it's available, I think pretty much like anywhere that you're able to rent movies, right? It's available on Apple, I know. I know it's
Yeah,
available.
so right now it's available on Apple, it's available on Google Play, it's available on Microsoft, it is available on YouTube Movies, and it's also available on Fandango at home, and it's supposed to be available on Amazon, and it's not yet, so it will be available on Amazon very soon.
Yeah, so Amazon users, keep a lookout for that one if you're interested in it. But yeah, thank you so, so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This has been Danny Krastik from Blue Flamingo Studios. Thank you very much for watching. If you are interested, this is where you can check out some of our other content. Thank you very much for joining us today.